Great, great. Thank you so much. So Jean, you decided to surprise us. So we
Yeah.
can see you didn't tell us that Dr. Philip Pearson is going to be joining us today. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Philip. And for
My
everyone who
pleasure.
can hear me, thank you so much, Philip. Yeah, great. So for everyone who can hear me, we're really happy that all of you are able to make it. Right now, we have about 42 people that have joined in, and then I can see many other people are trying to sign in. Today's topic is a very important one, and so without wasting any time at all, so let's allow Dr. Philip and Dr. Jen to jump in. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Mark. Right. So I think most of you, unless you're new, because remember last time we had a debunking myth series, which was a 3-week series. And by popular demand, you asked that we be doing this every month, and I'm more than happy to. And I thought, why not bring in a special guest? His name is Dr. Philippe Pearson. He is based in France right now, and he is the IBU Scientific Communication for Royal Canin. And aside from that, he's like my mentor. All the information that I have learned and continue to learn comes from the wealth of wisdom that he provides to all of us at Royal Canin. So it is such an honor and a privilege to have you here, Dr. Philippe. And you can say hello to everyone and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hello, thank you everyone to be here. We have already last year shared this very important topic, and we have realized that it's a real concern for all the breeders, not only in Nigeria, but also in France, in Europe. So this topic is really important, and we have two very good news to share with you today, because at Royal Canin we are also concerned by all your priorities, and so that's the reason why Jean is going to present to share with us these two good news in regards to parvovirus type 2 in breeding kennels. So thank you, Jean.
Thanks, Philippe.
The floor is yours.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. So unless if you want to have a question and you want to submit a question, please feel free. This is the time to do it. You have an expert with us today, and he is going to be there to answer all your parvo related questions, whether they are clinical, whether they are behavioral, whether they are pathophysiological, whatever the case is, he's here and we are here to help you. Mark will compile all your questions and we'll get to them at the end of it. And because in the spirit of surprises, we are going to have a little surprise for all of you, something that we'll give to all of you. Today, there won't be any winners or losers. So stay tuned until the end, and we'll be able to share with you some really great tools on how to take care of your dogs. Okay, so let's just get right into it. So of course, welcome. We'll be talking about how to manage parvo nutritionally, and we'll even just take a look at it on how it functions. What does this virus do to our little puppy? So you can imagine that little puppy like this suffering from parvo. As a vet, you may, or a breeder, or anyone who has seen something like this go on, it's such a heartbreaking thing to see. They are really suffering. So let's figure out how to best take care of them. And first, like I mentioned, we're going to be doing some fun interactive polls. So I want you to be able to interact with us and make sure that, we are here together. So let me see if the polling can be active. Okay, so it says your polling device session is inactive. I don't understand why that is, but maybe Mark is on the same account. I don't know, but we'll try and figure out that as we go along. But why not we just start it out and we can figure the rest out together. Okay, so what exactly is parvo? Okay, we know it as that really serious disease that can sometimes lead to death, but what exactly is it? So canine parvovirus, that's the actual name of it, or CPV. It's virus that is a small virus, non-enveloped, and it kind of looks like this. So when we know it from the field, before it was discovered in early 1900s, no, not 1900, between early 1950s, around there, towards 1970, they realized that the virus is caused by something called coronavirus, parvovirus 2. But as time went along towards the 1980s and further on, they realized that there's a variation in some sort of mutation that happens to this virus. And we ended up having things like CPV2A, 2B, and 2C, okay? So, and based on research, and this is specifically for Nigeria, there's some research papers that show that the major strain that is found in Nigeria is CPV2A. And the others, yes, they exist, but when testing has been done and PCR has been done to test and figure out which is the major variant, they found out that CPV2A is the one causing a lot of the issues. So how exactly do we now go about this? Okay, so this is what exactly happens. Of course, it doesn't happen in a dog this big because it happens to little puppies, but it has two variations. So one is that you end up having myocarditis, okay? And this is very rare, especially now because the mothers who are during the gestation period are already immunized against parvovirus. So it ends up not being able to transmit to the to the puppies in utero. So myocarditis does happen, the version of parvovirus, but it's a bit rare nowadays because of better immunization protocols. But the one we'll actually talk about today is the gastroenteritis, which causes very severe gastroenteritis in the puppies, and it's one of the major clinical signs. So who does it infect and how does it infect? So it occurs mainly in puppies between 6 weeks to 6 months of age, right? And this happens because they're puppies, and puppies tend to be very curious. They do things with their nose and their mouth. Unlike us who have hands, we use our hands to touch and grab and investigate the world around us. Puppies don't exactly have that ability. So this is how things come into their way and they get infected. They come across the pathogen from inhalation and they smell it and they eat it, and it then goes into their system. So this is just a small pictogram to show you what exactly happens during this process. So this is by direct transmission. So when we're talking about direct transmission, you have an infected dog who already is carrying the virus. So then they excrete it through their poop and their feces, and then a puppy will then be the one to ingest the virus, which goes into their system, into their blood, and multiplies in the bone marrow, multiplies in the lymph nodes, and then becomes the virus that causes the signs that we see. So that's direct, but this is what happens indirectly. So indirectly is where the puppy gets contaminated from other objects that are in its surrounding. Maybe someone has walked in from another kennel and walked into your kennel, and they happen to have carried the parvovirus on their shoes. It happens. That's why having some biosecurity measures, if you're a breeder, is very key, to make sure that even people who are coming to view your puppies are not bringing in with them some contaminants or infections. So even having like a small rag before the entrance of the kennel with some formaldehyde so that they can step on it before they enter is really important, so that you don't end up having transmission by indirect things. So these are like format or transmission. So from toys as well, maybe there's a previous puppy who was sick, and there's contamination of their toys, of their food bowls, all the things around them end up getting contaminated. And we'll talk about how exactly we can go about trying to cater to this and make sure that it doesn't happen, that we continue to have issues with contamination with transmission. Sorry, I'm trying to sign out so that we can be able to do the, okay, to be able to do the poll. Hopefully it will be working this time. It appears not to be working, not sure why. Anyway, no problem. So that's basically how it gets infected and what happens. So it's good to be cautious and know how it happens, by directly or whether it's indirectly. So since our poll is not working, I thought, why not we figure out who we have today So feel free to interact in the chat box and let us know if you're a breeder. Are you a breeder? Are you a veterinarian? Are you simply a pet owner and you wanted to come and learn here with us today? So feel free to use the chat box and tell us who you are. And if you're a pet breeder, a vet, a pet owner, we are happy to find out from you and be able to know who you are so that we can be able to properly give you the information that you need. Okay, so just feel free and we'll look at that a bit later. Okay, so why puppies? Okay, so why does it infect our puppies? Why don't we see parvovirus with older dogs? You know, and that's a question that I saw even in the registration form. Why does it occur to puppies? So this here is a graph that will be able to help us explain what happens to these puppies during the parvo phase, okay? So in the red line, it's basically showing how the antibodies work inside the puppy. So this line here is representing the antibodies, and the horizontal line, the antibodies, and the horizontal line represents the immunity, okay? So let's say the puppy is breastfeeding from the mother. The mother then transmits antibodies to the puppy. So antibodies are a good thing. They are the ones that help the puppy be protected from external infection. But as the puppy continues to grow, the maternal antibodies slowly start to decrease. So, and at this time, they are slowly trying to gain their own antibodies from within. So there are two different processes. So there's maternal antibodies, which is passive. And then we have the antibodies that are gained from the puppy itself, and that is the active. So these are two very important immunological processes that will help us understand what exactly happens to these puppies. So because of the decrease in the maternal antibodies, and yet they are not able to produce enough of their own, there happens to be what is known as an immunity gap. So this is a gap where they are not efficiently protected, either from their mother's antibodies or from their own. And this leads to now that gap where parvo can come and infect them. And it's something that happens so easily, so quickly. Their digestive system is also not fully developed. So it puts them in a very vulnerable place to get sick. And now we get the signs that we'll eventually see. And I also got some very interesting questions on the chat that was talking about how even after vaccination, I seem to be having an issue with parvo. And you see, the thing about vaccination and maternal antibodies, they don't work together. So there are some maternal antibodies that stay in the puppy for as long as even 18 weeks, for as long as 12 weeks. It depends on the mother. It depends on how well the colostrum has been taken from the puppies by the breast milk. So all these factors depend on the efficiency of the vaccine. And this is not to say that now you shouldn't vaccinate. It's definitely something that is a priority, and it's the #1 key way to protect your puppies from getting infected by parvo. So please vaccinate your puppies. And if you have questions regarding vaccination, protocol, and all those things, please feel free to ask, and Dr. Philippe will be able to give you all the amazing information and wisdom on that specific topic. So this is just insight on why exactly it affects puppies, because of this immunity gap that we see. So what happens next is that as their immunity continues to grow, then they get stronger. And as they grow older, then they don't get susceptible to it as much. And we tend to see that it seems like it's more susceptible to these large breed dogs, the Rottweiler, the Doberman, the German Shepherd, the Malamute, and the Labrador Retrievers. And is it that it's breed specific? No. It's not been scientifically proven that any of these breeds actually are more susceptible to parvo. There are certain factors that can be explained, but it's still not scientifically proven. But one of them could be the fact that the maternal derived antibodies, the levels that they decline more quickly in rapid growing breeds, like these breeds that we have mentioned, versus small breed dogs. So maybe that's one of the reasons that why large breed dogs tend to be more susceptible, large breed puppies especially, tend to be more susceptible to parvo. So that's something that you could keep in mind in case you have a kennel or you're breeding these large breed dogs, to take that extra step of care when you're rearing them, when you're raising them, to make sure that the environment is clean and that you're keeping them in a safe, not too populated area. Because the more the puppies in an area, the more that they will be spreading from one transmission to another. Like we mentioned, how the transmission happens. So when you have something like that where they're overpopulated, it's also not good for them. And we'll discuss how to go about cleaning, and we'll also discuss how to go about some of the other predisposing factors. So I've already mentioned overpopulation in kennels. That's something that could predispose your puppies to being having easy transmission of parvo, because let's say one of the puppies is a carrier and they're shedding the virus in their poop, and maybe the cleaning and the hygiene is not as effective as it should be. That's a risk. Another risk is malnutrition. Deficiencies in proteins, in having specific calories and vitamins like A, B, and E, which have been linked to help immunity. So when there's malnutrition in these puppies and deficiencies in key nutrients, the animal is not strong enough. They are not strong enough to be able to fight off any of the external pathogens that are coming to fight them internally. So having a puppy on the right nutrition makes a very big difference in determining them being strong. Think of it like us humans, you know, if you're weak and you're not eating efficiently, it predisposes you and you're not as strong to fight off even small things like a cold. So nutrition is something that's very important, and fighting off some of these other digestive parasites like giardiasis, coccidiosis, worms. So ensuring also that your puppies are not having their immunity be suppressed by some of these other diseases that could now suppress their immunity and lead them to be even more susceptible to getting parvo. So another thing is the increasing severity of infection. So maybe they have another infection that they are incubating. It could be anything. It could be something that's visibly seen in clinical signs, or it could be something that's slowly just incubating in their body. All these things can cause immunosuppression. So having your puppy go to see the vet on a regular basis is very important to make sure that they are healthy, they are strong, and they don't have any other underlying diseases that then make them more prone to getting other diseases. And concurrent surgery and anesthesia. And this is something I think it would be good to advise if you're a vet or if you're a pet owner. Make sure that you're getting vaccinations not within the time span of surgery or anesthesia, because again, this is a period of immunosuppression. The immunity is not as strong. So doing it before or after surgery is better, giving a time span in between each so that the puppy is strong and able to take in the vaccine. Okay. So that's what exactly it is about puppies. So feel free again to ask all your questions. But that's an overview of what it is, what parvo is, how it infects puppies, the variations of it, the strains, and how it happens in our little furry babies. So let's talk about some of the clinical signs that you might see. These ones I'm sure are very common to you because this is something that you have seen maybe. If you have not have seen, you may not know how exactly does this disease present. So new strains of CPV2, remember we talked about this, the new strains A, B, and C. So they require only 3 to 4 days post-exposure for clinical signs to appear. So it's something that's not very easy to catch early, but if you do and notice some clinical signs, then you can be able to protect them and fight off the infection and secondary infection better. So some of the clinical signs include acute onset of lethargy. Your puppy may start to look tired, they're not active, they're not playful. Maybe they used to be the kind of dog who runs here and there, but all of a sudden they don't want to move, they look dull. That's a key thing to note because puppies, that's not their nature. Anorexia, so maybe a loss of appetite. You know, puppies, maybe the puppy has been feeding okay, you've just gotten a diet that they really love, and all of a sudden they lose their appetite, they start to lose weight as well. That's something to look out for. Fever. So fever may or may not present because it depends on the dog and how early you can catch the signs. So fever is something that you can also be on the lookout for. If you're a breeder, like I mentioned last time during our last series, it's always good to have a thermometer with you. In your practice, whether you're doing it as a hobby, as a business, regardless, it's always good to have a thermometer, a rectal thermometer that you can just check your puppies on your own and you'll be able to know how they are doing in terms of their temperature. Another thing is vomiting and diarrhea, okay, which is the most common sign that we see. So you'll see vomiting, it happens a lot. You'll see diarrhea, and it contains most of the time mucus or blood and a very distinct smell. If you're ever encountered parvo, you know there's a very foul, distinct smell that it has. And the dogs always look rather uncomfortable, you know, being that it's a gastrointestinal problem. It is associated with some pain. So dehydration, by the time you're seeing dehydration, it means that there has been a long period of vomiting and diarrhea, loss of water. So this is one of the signs to look for. So each of these, when you see them together, this is the time to put up that warning sign and be like, okay, my puppy is not doing great. Could it be parvo? They need to see a vet. We need to get a diagnosis and figure out the way forward. Because the mortality of parvovirus is very high. It can be up to 90%. And that's super high, the risk of your puppy dying. So it's always best to keep an eye out on their signs, how they're doing, to make sure that they're okay. So this here is an example of a dog with parvo, and you can see the diarrhea. It's very watery, meaning they're losing a lot of blood, they're losing a lot of water, and a lot of electrolytes. So it usually looks like that and is blood stained or tinged. So this one is looking a bit reddish, and you can see the puppy is not looking happy, they're dull, they're lethargic. So these are some of the signs to look for and how it exactly prevents, okay? So how do we safeguard our pups from parvo, right? So in terms of this, ingestion of colostrum or colostrum substitute needs to happen within the first 8 hours of life, okay? I need you to remember that and keep that in mind, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. But ingestion of colostrum, so the colostrum is the first milk that comes out of the mother after giving birth. Even before birth, you'll start to see some drops of yellowish milk coming out of the mother. It's very important, and it contains all the immunoglobulins, which are great antibodies to protect the pup, okay? And because of that, I want to show you the difference of humans and puppies and why it's so important for them to breastfeed or have a colostrum substitute. So in humans, when the mother is gestating during the period of holding the baby, their immunity is able to transfer through the maternal bud, through the placenta, and have an immunity transference of 90 to 95%, okay, which is pretty high. But when we have our pups or our dogs, the percentage of total immunity acquired during gestation is so low. It's only 5 to 10% that is actually transferred to the fetus via the placenta. So that is why, and even more so, that making sure that the puppies breastfeed or there's a colostrum substitute, which is something I'll talk about also shortly, because you cannot rely on the gestational immunity that is passed on from mother to baby, because it's not very high and it's not sufficient to protect them throughout their lives. So this is a chart to be able to show you what exactly happens. Remember the first 8 hours of life, why it's so important to ingest colostrum. And this is because you can see this graph here. This is on a 24-hour basis. So you have here the absorption rate, okay? So how easily the immunoglobulins are going to be absorbed by the intestine. So within the first 8 hours, it's pretty high. But from there onwards, it starts to decrease and it's not absorbable anymore. So within the first 8, at most 24 hours, but the first 8 hours is very crucial. And this is because, one, the immunoglobulins, so these are antibodies that are found within the colostrum. Within the first 8 hours of life of the milk being produced, they are protected by the colostrum. So every protein that goes through the puppy's digestive system is broken down by enzymes, right? These enzymes are called trypsin. So that's one of the enzymes. So during these first 8 hours of life, those antibodies, which are proteins, are protected in the colostrum and they can't be broken down by trypsin. So they have what are known as anti-trypsin factors, which are protected And if they don't break down, then they can easily absorb and they can have the immunity that they're supposed to have. That's one key thing. Another key thing to note is that, sorry, I can't see here. Yes, so intestinal mucosa of newborn remains permeable to immunoglobulins. So this means that when the immunoglobulins are ingested from the colostrum, the intestine lining is able to remain open to absorb the IgGs, so the immunoglobulin Gs. But after that, the permeability of the mucosa of the intestine is not as efficient. So you're not going to be able to absorb as much, and the puppy won't be able to absorb as much. So these are two key reasons why having colostrum is a key benefit. And since we are talking about parvo, and parvo being one of the diseases that happens because of the low immunity of a puppy, making sure that they have their colostrum in the first 8 hours and have as much as possible is very key. And I'll talk about that if, let's say, the mother has died, or if the milk there's no milk, then we can talk about colostrum substitute. And I'll show you that when we talk about management. Okay. So aside from that, how do you kill parvo on surfaces? Okay, so there's two things that we need to talk about here. And sometimes I see that the cleaning is not as efficient as it should be. Because if you have a kennel, and I'm sure most of you are very clean, but there's a process to cleaning to make sure that you actually kill parvo. And this is because parvo is not susceptible to some of the common organic solvents that are out there. Okay, so like ammonium, quaternary ammonium, things like that, they're not susceptible to that. So cleaning needs to be systematic. So by systematic, I mean you need to clean every 2 days or every day, however it should be, on a regular basis. And then when we're talking about disinfection, the disinfection should be done on a periodic basis. And why is this? This is because cleaning is important. If you don't clean and you disinfect, what you've done is basically pour disinfectant on top of a biofilm of dirt. So when there's a biofilm, so this is where you have all the bacteria, all the virus, all the yucky stuff just sitting at the top of your surface, and disinfectant is not as effective because of this biofilm. So having things like a cleaning procedure where you clean thoroughly with an alkaline detergent to remove the biofilm first. And then after that, you make sure you're using warm water, at least 60 degrees, because most of the time if you're using too hot water, the detergents are not as efficient. So using warm water up to 60 degrees around there, and then you wash, you rinse, you scrub, you rinse. It's a process, but if we really want to protect our puppies, we have to do it the right way. So you rinse well with clean water, then you add another acid detergent. And then now this one could be, and these are some of the physical agents that inhibit the proliferation, such as sunlight. So if you're in a place with lots of sunlight, then at least you have a lower chance of the virus proliferating for that much. But still, it doesn't mean that you don't clean. You should still clean. So you clean, and then after that you rinse, okay? Then you dry. So it's a process, yes, clean, scrub, wash, dry, rinse, bleach, all those things. It's a process, but it's what happens to kill the parvo on surfaces. So the most efficient, and there are so many out there, but the most efficient and the most readily available, which I know would be readily available for all of us, is bleach. So the best way to use bleach is that you dilute 1 part bleach to 30 parts of water. So make sure that the bleach stays on the surface for 10 minutes. If it's not staying for that long, then it's not really efficiently killing the virus. And when you've rinsed away, you've not efficiently rinsed away all the virus. So you want to make sure that you've completely cleaned the place and it's rinsed and you can feel safe to keep your puppies there, okay? And then of course there's steam. So steam might be something that's a bit more pricey or maybe might not be readily available, but still, when you use steam in overheated and pressurized steam, it's actually very efficient and one of the most efficient and environmentally safe ways to get rid of parvo. So one idea that you could use is that I know there are some carpet people who use steam to clean their carpet. So if you can call them and you want to clean your kennel or your area where your puppies sleep, you can call them over and tell them to come, and they bring their steam machine to clean your area, to clean your carpets, things like that, where parvo could continue to live and survive there. So Parvo can actually live outside for a long time, even in sunlight exposure for at least a month. So that's a very long time to have it just be there and alive and putting your puppies at risk, okay? So that's it about how to best safeguard our puppies. So don't forget, colostrum is so important within the first 8 hours. And this is because of the absorption ability of the puppy's ability to absorb the IgGs, and also the fact that they are protected by the colostrum, so they can't break down from enzymes. So first 8 hours, very key. Okay, if I forget everything, if you forget everything I say, just remember that. Okay, so how do we diagnose canine parvovirus? For the vets here, you're like, I know how to do that, so maybe this part is not important, but hey, why not discuss it? So diagnosis is twofold, right? So of course you have the clinical signs, they come into the clinic. One is presumptive, the other is confirmatory, right? And as a pet owner, everyone loves a confirmatory diagnosis. So presumptive is based on the clinical signs, you know, the bloody poop, the lethargy, the anorexia, the foul smelling, distinctive diarrhea. These are all clinical signs that we can rely on, in a sense. And there's other thing in terms of the biological testing is that you'll find a strong leukopenia, okay, of up to 400 leukocytes per milliliter at some times, okay? So this is another key thing to look out when you're doing your blood work, and increased hematocrit. And this is because of the hemoconcentration that happens as a result of the puppy having dehydration. So these are some of the clinical signs in the blood work to look out for, but you know, they're not confirmatory. And to properly confirm it and make sure that you're testing, and just the same way we are doing today with the pandemic, we need to test, you know, and have confirmatory diagnosis, is that you need to take the direct detection from the feces. So you can take a fecal sample, take it to a lab that you rely on, and they can do two kind of tests. So PCR or serological testing. So PCR is more sensitive because then they test the DNA of the virus and be able to identify. And serological testing is also available, but it's not as reliable. And it's not as reliable and as sensitive because of the fact that it takes a very long time for the seroconversion rate to appear on the test, so about 5 to 6 days. And we have seen that the clinical signs start to show around 3 to 4 days after onset. So serological testing, aside from that, and the fact that you won't be able to tell if the antibodies are from vaccination or they're from infection. So it's not very sensitive and accurate to rely on, but if it's what is available and you know the history and of the puppy, then yeah, you can go for it. But again, this is all based on you as the vet trying to figure out how exactly am I going to figure out the diagnosis and do the differential diagnosis from other conditions that also have the clinical signs, you know, salmonellosis and E. coli diarrhea, all these things that seem to have the same clinical signs. So confirmatory diagnosis is really important and to be on the lookout for, and PCR is the best to use. Okay, so I won't even really focus on diagnosis. I want to go right into management, and that is what we are talking about here. So how exactly do we manage and treat Parvo, right? So I had a lot of you ask many questions about Parvo. You know, how do we treat it? How do we manage it nutritionally? And we'll talk all about that. So because Parvo has no cure, most of it is palliative or supportive treatment. We're trying to take care of the animal and make sure they stay as strong as possible. So rehydration is one of the key things, making sure that their electrolytes are stable and that they're not losing, you're balancing out the water that they're losing from vomiting. So things like Ringer's lactate is a great fluid to use during the palliative treatment. So 100 to 150 ml per kg per day. So that's something that you can do intravenously to make sure that puppies are okay and they are able to support their electrolyte balance. So, and also antiemetics, you know, so modify the gastrointestinal motility and make sure to stop the vomiting, and you know, because it's also making them lose electrolytes and water. Systemic antibiotic therapy. This is so key because most of the time the puppy doesn't necessarily die from parvo. It dies from the secondary bacteria that comes about, the E. coli that come about and put the animal at risk to getting endotoxemia. So having systemic antibiotic therapy on a consistent basis based on the dosage of the dog is really essential to help the animal survive and make sure that they remain as stable as possible, because without it, then secondary infection starts to happen, and the endotoxemia, septicemia, and that's how they eventually end up dying. And of course, we never want that with a parvo case. We always want them to survive. And I won't really go much into the palliative treatment, but that's basically most of it. For me, I want to really take time and deep dive into the nutritional part of it, okay? Because that's why we're here. So how do we manage it nutritionally? Remember that colostrum substitute that I talked about earlier? And you may have seen it or may not have seen it, but we'll talk about it and why it's such a great thing to have in your arsenal when treating parvo. The other thing is intensive care liquid diets. Okay, so these are diets that they can be given through tubes, through feeding tubes, to be able to maintain the animal. And I'll show you all about that. So the first one we're going to be talking about is Puppy Protect. Okay, so this is a innovative, a very technological forward product, and it's a colostrum substitute. There is the baby dog milk or the milk replacer, which is the one that is given when the mother is not producing milk, but it does not contain any colostrum-like substitutes. So what exactly is it? Is that it contains specific immunoglobulins. So these are immunoglobulins Y, okay? And they target E. coli and canine parvovirus. And one thing to note is that this is something that you should give to increase passive protection, not for treatment, okay? So this is something that should have been given much earlier within the same period of time during breastfeeding, so that you can give an increase of the passive protection. So by passive, I mean, you remember the one that is given from the mother to the puppy, it's the same thing. So the passive immunity is what we are trying to increase and protect this puppy against. And I'll show you how exactly they put that protection of E. coli and canine parvovirus in there. But the other thing is that it reduces the risk of endotoxemia that is linked to E. coli. So what this does is that it boosts, you're boosting the immunity and you're giving that extra help to this puppy who is undergoing this very sensitive, vulnerable period. And for example, maybe the mother is not giving enough milk, this is a great substitute to have. And at least, it still has the key antigen protectors from E. coli and canine parvovirus using the immunoglobulins. So how exactly does it work? So we have our active immunity and our passive immunity, right? So for active, we know if the puppy is vaccinated, then the antibodies grow within the body. Remember, the puppy getting its own antibodies from within itself. That's what happens through active immunization and through vaccination, so that when an external antigen comes and tries to, attack the puppy, it's protected from the immunoglobulins that are, or the antibodies that are created within the body, okay? So what happens with Puppy Protect is that a chicken, okay? Yes, a chicken. A chicken is inoculated with E. coli and canine parvovirus, okay? So these are all antigens or pathogens that don't affect the chicken. They are specifically made for the canines, so they won't affect the chicken. So the chicken just is walking around with parvovirus in its blood, but it's fine. So what happens is that the same thing happens with the passive immunity, is that it passes the immunity down to its eggs. And the eggs are the ones that now store the immunoglobulin Y that is against E. coli and parvovirus. Then what happens when you feed the puppy? Then it's passively given to the puppy, and the same process of protection takes place. So that's what happens. So you had these egg yolks. So the egg yolks are harvested, the ones which hold the majority of the immunoglobulins that protect against the E. coli and the parvovirus. They are harvested and they are dried. And that's the powder that you'd see here. And that is then incorporated into the Puppy Protect. So that's how the colostrum substitute works. And the main point of this, you remember the maternal antibodies that are being given already by the mother? This blue line will try to signify or trying to show you that there's an increase in that passive protection. We're trying to prolong it as much as possible to make sure that that immunity gap is not as wide as it normally is, okay? So that's one thing that having something like a colostrum substitute is so important to have. And aside from that, it's made with no starch, because, you know, starch is, puppies can't digest that. And it also uses maltodextrin. And you'll also see maltodextrin in what I'm about to talk about. But maltodextrin is like a sugar powder. So instead of using lactose, which is something that puppies are not really able to efficiently break down, and, you know, they're almost lactose intolerant, so to speak. So it has that maltodextrin, and it also has DHA, which helps protect the puppies. It has prebiotics. It's fully balanced food, you know, like milk, and it mimics the nutrient properties of the mother. So the nutrient properties in terms of calcium and phosphorus, it's more or less the same as the dog. The content in terms of proteins, the content in terms of the sugars, all those things that mimic the breast milk. And that's the best place that you can find not only a milk replacer, but something that adds that extra protection to the puppies. So that's it about the colostrum substitute. Feel free to ask your questions. And then we have the liquid intensive care diet, okay? So this is something that you give supportively, you know. It's not necessarily a cure, but it's definitely a way and a method to try and help support these puppies who are undergoing so much. So aside from the medications and the drip that you're giving, there needs to be some sort of tube feeding, because these puppies have not eaten for a very long period of time, perhaps maybe 2-3 days, they have not eaten because they're undergoing this condition. So you give the tube feeding by a nasopharyngeal tube, okay, which is pretty easy to put in. And you put it in through the nose and you tie it on just like you see on the face here, and they can sit with it in a confined space, and you can do progressive refeeding. So this is where the puppy has been anorexic for a bit. So they have not been eating and their stomach has been empty. So you want to do it progressively, because you don't want to just pump the dog with food and it's even in a place where the mucosa is not functioning properly. The brush border has been irritated and almost eroded. So you want to do it slowly. So let's say the first day you do 1/3 of the requirements of the liquid diet. And then the second day you now move to 1/2. And then after that, now you can give the full dosage, and everything is dosage. It's like medicine. So it's, well, technically in terms of dosage, right? So in terms of that, it's based on the animal's weight, and I'll show you a chart after I'm done with this. If you're interested, I'll show you a chart of how it should be measured based on the refeeding process. So if the animal has been anorexic for more than 5 days, then you do it even more progressively, where you start with 1/4 of the daily requirement. You move to 1/2, then you move to 2/3, then you move to 3/4, then you move to full requirements by the 5th day. And by that, you're slowly trying to gain the strength of the gastrointestinal lining. You're slowly also giving the nutrient values that it needs, but in small, high energy doses, okay? So that's what it's called. It's called gastrointestinal high energy liquid diet, okay? And it's very easy to give. You just put in the tube. If you're going to the clinic, then you leave the pup there and they can be taken care of, okay? So one of the main features about the gastrointestinal high energy is that it has the digestive support, okay? So this is because it has highly digestible formula like hydrolyzed proteins to help support the digestive health. So you'll find that the dosages are pretty small. It's not a large quantity because you don't want to overwhelm the gut, but it's packed, so meaning it's nutrient dense. So there's a lot of nutrients in a small quantity of fluid. So you're giving the nutrients that it needs, but in small dosages to not overwhelm the gut. So that's the digestive support. It also contains maltodextrin, which has been shown to assimilate well, even after mucosal injury, which is what is happening with this puppy right now, is that there's a lot of mucosal injury, there's irritation in the gut, there's bleeding, there's erosion. So you want to make sure that they're still feeding, because if they're not feeding, there's only so much that glucose and Ringer's lactate can do. The animal still needs to feed, you know. So antioxidants, so things like beta-carotene, taurine, vitamin C are also added, and they have been shown to improve the immune function in young puppies. So that's another addition that you're getting from the diet. And like I said, it's very high energy density that provides daily energy requirements in a reduced feeding volume that you can do progressively. And by the time you start to see that the animal is ready to eat, you know, now it's wanting to eat, it's hungry, then now you can slowly start to incorporate small soft diets like the recovery diet or soft meals that they can eat in small quantities to slowly help them regain their gut health. Okay, so, and aside from that, it's easy tube feeding, you know, it's a very light viscous fluid that can be fed very easily. You can divide it in 6 times a day, so very, very small meals throughout the 24-hour period to give them the energy and to be able to recover. Okay, so that's it for the liquid intensive care diet, and it's very interesting. And I think if there are any vets here, it would be something I would believe is one of the key ways to help support a puppy that is undergoing parvo, you know, because this is something that you need in your arsenal to be able to give that supportive, nutritive care. And it's in a way that is easily given and has all the nutrients that it needs. Okay, so that's it. And in terms of the recovery, so when the appetite has recovered during hospitalization or survival for more than 4 days, so when this is always a good prognosis, when you start to see the animal now want to eat, their appetite is recovering, then after 4 days following the onset of the symptoms, this is always a good prognosis. And that's what we always want to hear. We always want to know that your puppy is doing well, that they are surviving, and that they are thriving, you know, because we want them to get better. So that's always a good prognosis. And just another note about the liquid diets, they're not something to give for long periods of time. You know, the dog still needs to eat proper daily requirement for growth. So for however amount the vet feels that the puppy needs to continue with this diet, but not for very, very long periods of time, just for the recovery period. So that's why it's a liquid diet, intensive care for the recovery period. Okay. And ultimately, this is how we want our puppies to look like, right? Just happy and frolicking and healthy. And that is what we hope to do. And I hope this talk has been good for you guys. And if you have any questions, I'll allow Dr. Mark to take us through the questions if there are any. And Philippe will be the one to walk us through the questions. All right. So Dr. Mark, over to you, and thank you so much, everybody.
Okay, so thank you so much, Jean. What a wonderful presentation. I've been getting a lot of questions from the background, and so I've summarized them into 4 basic questions, even though Philip has made a lot of effort to answer almost all of them, but I don't think it's everybody that is looking at the chat box. So it will be good. So basically all the questions there, I've summarized them into 4 questions. So Philip can take over from here. Dr. Philip?
Yes.
Okay, so I've all the questions that people sent in, I've summarized them into 4 basic questions. I know you've done justice by responding to a lot of them, but then I don't think it's everybody that is using the chat. So you may want to shed more light on them. So if you scroll through, you will see the 4 questions.
Yeah.
So question 1, question 2, question 3, and question 4.
Okay, so question 1, is vaccination a certain prevention for parvo or a sure prevention? Unfortunately, no vaccination can guarantee 100% protection, especially because of these immunity gap because if we vaccinate too early, the antigens in the vaccines are neutralized by the remaining maternally derived antibodies. And if we vaccinate too late, then the virus can kill the puppy in the meantime. So there is a gap between passive immunity and active immunity due to contact with the wild virus or with the antigen in the vaccine. So what we can do is to try to reduce these immunity gap to a few days instead of 2 weeks, for example. And usually when there is a parvovirus outbreak in a breeding kennel, the vet will identify the peak of the disease. Let's say that most of the puppies are suffering from parvo at 6 weeks of age. Then we can start the vaccination 1 week before. So as soon as 5 weeks, even though it's not written on the notice of use. So this is one way to fight against the parvovirus. Unfortunately, we can only prevent, and prevention is much more efficient than treatment. So for question 2, my dogs were taken to the vet for parvo treatment and they eventually died. But when I self-medicate through a method specially derived by me, it tends to work. So is it that vets are not competent to treat parvo? No, I don't think, but we should share between breeders and veterinarians the protocols. So if you think that you have found a very efficient protocol, please share this protocol with your vet, and your vet can even share with the vet community, and we will improve the prognosis by sharing more than by fighting, because veterinarians and breeders have very complementary skills, and it's only by sharing knowledge that we will finally win the battle against the parvovirus. The question 3 is about the poultry, the chicken. Yes, we vaccinate these poultry with attenuated vaccines that are targeting 2 pathogens in the canine species, the canine parvovirus and the E. coli, a specific strain of E. coli that is responsible for most of the endotoxemia following parvovirosis. So the chicken are naturally not sensitive to these 2 pathogens, so they don't suffer from this vaccination, but they produce in the yolk of their egg immunoglobulins that obviously don't protect the chicks, but the yolk is collected, as Jean said, and he's dehydrated and are incorporated into the puppy protect, which is kind of colostrum substitute, which is the only specific colostrum substitute on the market. All the other so-called colostrum substitute are targeting bovine pathogens, so they are interesting in terms of nutrition, but not in terms of immunity. So are we saying that colibacillosis does not occur in poultry? Yes, they are not completely protected against all the strains of colibacillosis, but these canonized strains, they are not sensitive to these canonized strains. But there are plenty of strains of E. coli, and we are targeting one enteroinvasive E. coli that is pathogenic only for dogs and for the canidates.
Okay, Dr. Philip?
Yeah.
Are you done with that?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay. Sending in more questions. I just wanted to mention something about question 2.
Yeah.
So the person said my dog's taken to a vet for parvo treatment eventually dies, but when I self-medicate through a method specially derived by me, it tends to work. Is it that the vets don't know how to treat parvovirus? So thank you so much for what you said. Another way to also look at it is I wanted to find out how the person was actually sure that what he diagnosed of the puppies to have is parvovirus, because that's another thing. You know, Jean, when Dr. Jean made the presentation, so we understand there are clinical signs that you will see, and those clinical signs will give you an indication that these are parvovirus, like vomiting and diarrhea and things like that. But the truth is that there are so many other infections that can actually make a dog to develop vomiting and diarrhea and weakness. So some of those signs may tend to look like parvovirus, and then you think they are parvovirus. And so if you self-medicate probably by just giving an ORT to the dog will survive, because so many things like bacteria can actually make a dog to lose a lot of water through the vomiting and diarrhea. So at those circumstances, the dog doesn't have parvovirus. But then if you did one or two things and then it survived. So in the medical field, so vets are trained and they are qualified to treat these diseases. We know that parvovirus is a viral infection. It's a viral infection. So most viral infections, just like we have COVID-19 right now, most viral infections, they don't have a cure. What we have is we manage the situation. So we manage the situation by making sure that the immunity of the animal is boosted up and so many other things that we do. So it's not enough to say that because you treated 2 dogs and they survived, and then the other 2 didn't survive, and because you took that 2, so many factors are into play in this case. So that's not a good conclusion. But like Dr. Philip said, if you feel there is a protocol, because the reason why we're organizing this webinar is to share information. Information is not hidden these days. Information are free. People post it free online and things like that. So what we as Royal Canin is doing is that we try to share new information so that everybody will know. So we will strongly recommend, it's very important you work with your vet at all times. If you feel there is a new information you have, by all means, share it. And then people can develop on that, you know? So that's just what I want to contribute.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Yeah, you are perfectly right. And so we have other questions on the duration of how long should be the colostrum substitute given to the puppies. So it should be given for immunity reason during the 8 first hours of life, but it can be given during the whole lactation, not for immunity reason, for immunity benefits, but for the nutritional benefits, and also for another kind of immunity, because the IgY can play exactly the same role as the IgA that are naturally contained in the mother milk. So, and the role of the IgA is to protect the digestive tract locally against endotoxemia and bacterial translocation. So the best way is to use these puppy protect exactly the same way as the previous baby dog milk. So as a colostrum substitute, but also as a milk substitute. And as Jean mentioned, another benefit of these colostrum substitute is that the lactose has been replaced by maltodextrin, which doesn't need lactase enzyme to be digested and absorbed. So it can give energy to the puppies, even though their their intestinal mucosa is eroded. And when the intestinal mucosa is eroded, all the enzymes that are on the top of the villi are flushed out. So that's the reason why they become lactose intolerant, and they become intolerant to most of the sugars. So another question is on the role of Paxine and Vibactra in the management or prophylaxis of parvoviruses. Unfortunately, I don't know the commercial name of, so I don't know what is the active principle of Paxine and Vibactra. So maybe you know if it's an antibiotic or an antivirus drug.
Yeah. Okay. So Paxine and Vibactra, they are an antioxidant and immune booster. So I think it's something Jean has touched already about the management of parvovirus. So it's not a rare canine product, and so and then we're not here to talk about specific drugs for the treatment of parvovirus and things like that. So we do remember when we talked about management and the diagnosis, clinical signs and prevention, what is parvovirus. And so in the management area, so, you know, like veterinarians have a lot of things they use, like we talked about infusion and things like that, because the most important thing is that the animal is not, the pet is not losing water. So we talked about the infusion and all that, which of course we expect people to do that with their veterinarian. We're not educating you to do these things at home, but it's just that you know. So when you go to visit your veterinarian and he's making all these recommendations, then you know what to do. So apart from Paxine and Vibactra being an antioxidant, there are so many other antioxidants. But we strongly recommend that people work with their veterinarians. And that's actually part of the reason why we're doing this. So when you self-medicate and things like that, drug dosages, it's extremely important. How much quantity do you give based on the certain factors that you're seeing? And most of the time, before a vet doctor can tell you that your dog has a parvovirus, most of the time they have to do a clinical test, which is testing. Dr. Jean also mentioned that. So from the clinical signs, you cannot conclusively say that your dog has a parvovirus. So we still have the PCR test, which is done with this tool. So these things are very important. Thank you. Yeah. I hope that has shed light on that.
So if they are non-specific immunity boosters, why not using them? Have no experience on these two drugs, but antioxidants, non-specific immunity boosters are more than welcome in these in the holistic treatment of parvoviruses. So question. So what is the ideal vaccination protocol for puppies? Unfortunately, there is no ideal vaccination protocol for puppies. So we can benefit from the general guidelines, vaccination guidelines that your vet can get online. But these vaccination guidelines should be adapted to each kennel, because as I mentioned earlier, in some kennels the peak of outbreak is around 8 weeks of age. In other kennels it can be at 6 weeks of age. So usually the vet can adapt the vaccination protocol to the time when the outbreak is at its peak, and start the vaccination 1 week to 10 days before the peak of the disease. And sometimes vets they really vaccinate with monovalent vaccines every 10 days in order to cover the whole immunity gap, the whole critical period. So sometimes the puppies, they can get 5, 6, 7 vaccinations every 10 days. until we can start really the other valences. So, but what is really important is to focus on the parvovirus and not to use multivalent vaccine in order not to distract the immune system of the puppy, but really to focus on the main problem, which is the parvo.
Okay, there is another question that just came in.
Yeah. So reading
someone is
and writing
asking,
that vaccination could be done at 14th week after the first 3 doses. Yes, we can. There is no risk at over vaccinating, in fact. So when the kennel is really highly vaccinated, highly protected, usually the colostrum brings a lot of antibodies to the puppies, and by doing so, it delays the onset of the critical period, and sometimes some puppies can even die from parvo at the age of 14. So it can be very late, but it's due to the inefficiency of the previous vaccine that have been neutralized by maternally derived antibodies. So how long should puppies be on the substitute? We have already answered this question. So during the whole lactation.
I think there are 2 more questions that just came in. I'm trying to put them there.
Yeah.
Just give me a
So
second.
Most of the owners,
Question 9 and
it's
question
too late
10.
to present their dog. Or probiotics. So Paxine and Vibactra are probiotics. So probiotics can be advised because unfortunately they cannot be included in dry diets because they don't survive to the heating process. So, but usually yogurt are enough and can play the same role as probiotics.
Okay, I've sent in 2 more questions.
Transaction limit has been exceeded. Even when I don't do any transaction that day.
Hello, Dr. Philip.
Yeah, so there is another interesting question about killed vaccine to vaccinate the dam. It's a good idea, but there is no killed vaccine available on the market, or less and less. And anyway, the dam, which is adult, is not sensitive to parvovirus. So you can use a live vaccine without any risk for the dam to get the parvovirus. So it's better to vaccinate with live vaccine before before mating and not during pregnancy, but in case of emergency, we can even use live vaccines in the 15 days following the whelping, before the whelping, in order to boost the passive immunity in her colostrum. But the protect is doing the same job, so it's reinforcing the passive immunity by giving a supplement that is an immunity booster, in fact. So the cost of this substitute, I let Mark answer this question because we have no interference on the price policy in Nigeria. So can you answer this question, Mark?
Which one? The last one says
the cost of the Puppy Protect is quite expensive, but it's worth a life saved. So it's. Do you have a? Can you give an idea
of the price?
Yeah, the price of the.
Yeah, I'm just trying to pull it up.
In Nigeria.
Yeah, so the Puppy Protect comes in two sizes. One is 300 grams and the other one is 1.2 kg. The 300 grams is 17,004 and the 1.2 kg is 51,800.
So it's very expensive, but it's really a technology that has no competitor, in fact, and it's really worth investing. The breeders, I've heard that in Nigeria, the breeders that who have used these Puppy Protect are very satisfied. Do you confirm, Mark?
Sorry, I didn't. Your voice was cracking. Hello, Philip.
Yeah.
Your voice was cracking. I didn't get what you said.
So I have heard that in Nigeria, the breeders who have used the Puppy Protect in decreasing the prevalence of parvovirus are very happy with that, are satisfied?
Yes, actually. Yes, it is. The major complaint is not about the efficacy and how good it is in their breeding program. What a lot of people are complaining, they are complaining about the price. And it's also increasingly more expensive now, especially now that $1 is virtually about 477 naira. So, but if the Nigerian economy improves, then the price will drop, and so everybody.
Yeah, we know that it's very expensive, but vaccination is also very expensive. Serotherapy is very expensive. Veterinary care is also very expensive. So it's up to the breeder to evaluate the cost and benefits that he can expect from these technology.
Yes.
So some breeders, they do not vaccinate their puppies, and so surprisingly, these puppies live healthy lives. So all the better. It means that probably they have a perfect protection, natural protection against the parvovirus, or that the parvovirus has not reached the kennel. But usually the protocol to eradicate the virus is it can never be 100% sure, because we cannot completely eradicate a parvovirus from a breeding kennel because they are so resistant in the environment. But the goal is not to completely eradicate the virus, but to keep the infectious pressure under the threshold, the dangerous threshold. And that's the goal, the purpose of hygiene.
Yeah.
So did I miss other question?
Yeah, okay. So I just want to touch the question 10. So the person said some breeders in Nigeria specifically do not vaccinate their puppies, and surprisingly, these puppies live healthy lives and do not come down with the virus. So how do you explain this, please? And so just like we talked about when someone said that he was able to treat Parvo on his own, but if he tries the vet, he dies at the vet. And so these are not So it's just like someone saying, okay, I've never had malaria in my life. And then the person is asking me, why haven't I been able to have malaria in my life? So it's not something that we can, that I can basically explain to the person and then say, okay, oh, it's because the person did the proper vaccination of the parents, or so many factors plays a lot of role here, you know. And so, just like Dr. Phillips said, if you observe a strict biosecurity, so that means in the process of breeding those puppies, you make sure that nobody comes from anywhere else to your breeding kennel, because Dr. Jean did mention that sometimes infections are, so the way fecal oral routes most of the time. So fecal oral routes, and then sometimes friends that come to visit your kennel, and sometimes flies and things like that. In fact, if you have another dog that lives in one compound that had parvovirus, and then the dog vomited and stooled, and then flies perch on that, and then they transfer into your own compound, definitely the dog is going to come down with parvo. So there are certain things, you know, like if there are certain things, certain management the person is doing, which is helping them, by all means continue. But of course, we can't take this in isolation and then say, don't do this or don't do that, because it might work for that person, it might not work for you. So it's always good to, you know, like to follow the scientifically tried method to achieve these results. That's my input in that area.
Yeah, you're right, Mark. And in addition, there is a rule in epidemiology saying that when 80% of the population is protected through vaccination, the 20% remaining are also safe and are not at risk for the disease. So there is, it's an epidemiologic rule that applies probably to parvovirus. So fortunately, this breeder is probably vaccination of the other kennels.
Okay, like herd immunity.
Yeah.
Like in our own case now, right?
Yeah.
The COVID-19, like
Yeah,
herd
so
immunity. Yeah.
herd immunity.
That's right.
The UK, United Kingdom, they tried herd immunity when COVID-19 hit, and then after some time they found that they couldn't sustain it, and then they had to lock down like everybody.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's one more question.
Yes, this one more question. I think Dr. Phillips should take it.
Yeah.
Talking about the best before date and use by date and best before date.
Yeah, it is safe, meaning that it's well protected against oxidation and against bacterial contamination, but we cannot guarantee the efficiency of the antibodies. So we cannot guarantee the immunity side. So we can guarantee the safety side, but not the immunity. So it is safe, but maybe not as efficient as if the Protect were within the best before date. It's safe to use, and it's probably nutritionally safe, but on an immunologic point of view, we cannot guarantee the efficiency of these Puppy Protect because it has been studied only during these best before date.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Philip. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. And thank you for everyone who came. So I wanted to show you what I'd be sending out to everyone, because today we didn't have a quiz, but we love giving. So we'll send to all of you, even those who registered and those who participated or may have left early. So there's this guide on some misconceptions about dog and cat breeding. So in case you're a breeder and this is something that is of interest to you, we'll send this to you. Or I'm not sure if, Mark, you have some copies with you, or that you can send some with the next talk. It's a really great book to talk about vaccines, viruses, parasites, reproduction, all the things that I think a breeder would need to know. So I think this is something key that would have as a tool for you to use. So we'll send that to you free of charge. And We'll also
Thank
send
you so
to
much.
you some hygiene principles for dog and cat breeders. Well, even if you're not a breeder, I think it will be good for you to read through it and know what are some of the hygiene principles that we talked about, that like the biofilm, what exactly is biofilm, and cleaning, and why do you clean, how to efficiently disinfect, because some conditions, some viruses are not easy to get rid of, others are easy to get rid of. So what are some of these hygiene protocols that we need to put in place to make sure that your puppies and your dogs and cats are healthy? Okay, so yeah, that's it from me. So thanks everybody.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jane.
Okay,
Thank you
see
very
you.
much.
Thanks,
See you.
Philippe. Thanks, Mark. Thank
All the
everybody.
best.
Okay. So the
Bye.
material, so we're going to email it to everybody that registered.
Yes.
That we have the email addresses, right? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
All right.
great.
Dr.
All right.
Bojara, I can see your face there. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for
thank you,
attending.
Mark.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
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 Love you guys.
This is the